Lauren, thank you. And thank you to the Community Foundation. What a great event. Lauren, you weren't very specific as to what I should speak to, so I decided to talk about myself, since it's the one thing that I feel like I'm the greatest expert on. My father inspired me in many ways. He was a Russian immigrant, and he was a classic entrepreneur, a shoe salesman, a bootlegger, and later a grocer. And for some crazy reason, just being around him, I became an entrepreneur. When I was in 6th grade, I got busted for selling illegal insect collections to other students. And when I was in college, when I was 19, I promoted a concert with a couple startup bands that you may have heard of, the Grateful Dead and Santana. In 1973, before some of you were even born, I moved to Crested Butte. I was a cocky ski bum, and it was the beginning of my education. I opened the Slogar in 1976. When I sold it 8 years later, Mac Bailey immediately changed it to a fried chicken restaurant, and it became wildly successful, way beyond my experiences. Later, I got involved in real estate, and when I was 30, I made a lot of money. When I was 32, I had lost every penny of it and was looking at bankruptcy and foreclosures. I ended up in Denver and actually began splitting my time between Denver and Crested Butte for 30 years. And when I was in Denver, I grew a restaurant company, and I had, at its peak, 7 restaurants. But my success brought other competitors into the market, and my restaurant company imploded. At the same time, I had acquired Larimer Square, and after about 5 years, the Cherry Creek Mall opened, and many of my tenants left. And I found myself in a fetal position, crying about what was going to happen. But that precipitated a turnaround in Larimer Square, where I ended up partnering with chefs and eventually created the largest concentration of chef-driven restaurants in one block in America. But the theme of these setbacks is really what I wanted to talk to you about change, crises, and reinvention. And Chris hit all those points ahead of me, but thank you, Chris, but I'll just continue my story. So from that experience that I thought I'd never recover from, I ended up with sort of a new reality. This involvement with all these talented chefs that were really provocateurs that wanted to change the world. So they were very interested in the food system. And through that, I became interested in sustainable and regenerative agriculture, and also focused on hunger in America. It's a factoid that I often mention that probably everyone in this room knows, but 1 in 6 people in the richest country in the world suffer from food insecurity. I had the pleasure of becoming a board member at the foundation of a nonprofit called We Don't Waste, which would recycle unused food from catered events, from school districts, and from grocery stores. And when it started, it was in a beater old station wagon. And last year, I mean, it's hard to believe this, but it's been about 12 years, they served 2 million meals, all the way from homeless shelters to Indian reservations. I also, I'm sorry. So in my preoccupation with changing the food system, we did things like a rooftop farm on the on the top floor of the parking structure in Larimer Square. From the affiliation with the chefs, I got involved and I founded the Food and Wine Festival here in Crested Butte. And these prima donna chefs, these provocateurs, would come up here and they'd have this great time. But after about 3 years, they said to me that they wanted more than just cooking expensive meals for rich people. Really, the expression was rich Texans, but I left that part out. So we embarked on a curriculum called Eat, Drink, Think, and we brought in a collection of really inspiring people. A young lady from the Monterey Bay Aquarium talking about sustainable fishing, a James Beard chef butcher who talked about utilization of complete animal parts, to Michelle Nassan, who's another James Beard winner, who's involved in public policy and was pivotal in creating a change so that food stamps could be used at farmers markets so that people on food stamps weren't just afforded the opportunity to buy the cheapest of foods. But that curriculum didn't resonate. And I think partly because the patrons to the Food and Wine Festival thought that shopping at Whole Foods was probably making their impact on the food system. So we abandoned it about 5 or 6 years ago. About 6 years ago, my partner Teresa and Teresa's sister died prematurely. And she left behind a 4-year-old daughter. And Teresa wanted to bring the daughter to Colorado from Nebraska. And I said, there's no way, I'm 67, I'm not going to take a child. And, I just was insistent that this wasn't going to happen. But lo and behold, Teresa came back to Colorado with Lily. And I just fought it. I refused. I said I would never do this. No, I'm not going to do it. But Lily put her little hand in my back pocket. And after about 4 hours, I relented. So I think that story is an example of my latest and greatest reinvention. With Lily, when we put her in school here, one of her first extracurricular activities was to work in the community garden. So it was on Tuesdays, they'd work in the garden. On Thursdays, they'd sell the produce in the parking lot. And it was like this aha moment for me. Here in Denver, I was sort of involved in more grandiose schemes, thinking that, we could have a farm outside of Denver that would produce food for Larimer Square restaurants along with the rooftop deck. But all of a sudden I realized that here in this little community, you were checking all the boxes. And it's part of the reason why I'm so engaged with Mountain Roots, because they're keen on creating this framework for a sustainable agricultural system in this high alpine environment, education and food pantry. Right now, Crested Butte is experiencing a tsunami of change. It's easy to, I remember about 9 months ago, eating at one of the restaurants at the bar and sitting next to a gentleman who was just complaining incessantly about what was happening here. And he blamed all of it on short-term rentals. I didn't necessarily agree that that was the singular impetus for all the change. But it reminded me that it would be easy for us to sit around. I mean, in the old days, there were potbelly stoves, and you could sit around the potbelly stove and you could talk about the good old days of when coal was burnt in town. And I think that it was an early example of cloud seeding, and there was much more snow way back when I first moved here. There was no north facelift, and you'd have powder for days after a storm, as opposed to a number of hours. And of course, the bathhouse is gone. But change is present every day, and you have to make a decision if you're going to sit on the sidewalk and wait for life to come back the way it was, or stand up and embrace it and make a change. And I think everyone in this room recognizes the change, but also the opportunity. With crisis comes opportunity, and I think it's important to all of us to seize it. For me, I think it's a recognition that addressing the change isn't simply something that can be done in the public sector. I look back to my experience with Denver Union Station, which was a collaboration with both the private and public sector, which created something really magnificent. I'm inspired that one of my favorite restaurateurs in town, Kailina, is building a 10-unit complex in CB South to help house her employees, which to me represents an example of how private enterprise can be used to solve social problems. Personally, I'm involved in preliminary discussions with Western Colorado University to help jumpstart their hospitality program with the goal of creating an accredited program that would attract students that would embrace a hospitality credential. And for us, as we embark on more hospitality, more restaurant and food service operations at this end of the valley, for us it would be a way of creating a conduit for educated people to work in our facilities, either as interns or as graduates. I think that a key point that I want to make is that the demographic here is changing, and it's changing so dramatically. And a lot of the people that are coming in not only have a lot of money, but they have a lot of resources and experiences. And I think that harvesting them is critical to finding solutions. And the people that are moving here, for the most part, are not interested in an exclusive experience, but they want to be inclusive in this crazy little community. And I think that a goal is to figure out how to embrace them in making this a better place. So Crested Butte, if I have to think back what my favorite times of Crested Butte are, I don't know. I mean, they've all been great, but I truly believe that the future that we're looking at can also be great. So I think that all of us need to be co-conspirators in finding a path forward for this great community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.